Good afternoon. My name is Rich Lowers. I'm duly appointed to help manage the discussion with this panel. I've helped this esteemed panel put together a few slides. I am not a slide reader. If there's something on one of those slides that I either forget to go over, one of them will either flag me down, or I'm going to count on one of you guys to flag me down. If there's something that I say or that one of them says that either makes no sense to you or that it's an acronym or some crazy industrial speak that we use, let us know immediately, please. And like I said, truly, there's a $20 bill in the front row. If anybody wants to try and check it out, just let me know.
Hey, Rich, real quick before you get started, general housekeeping rules, please mute your cell phones. Feel free to ask questions, but since the session is being recorded, we request that you wait for either this handheld mic or the catch box to come your way. And for anyone who is tweeting this session, it is G062. So, Rich, take it away.
G062. Okay, I'm sending a tweet right now. So this discussion was really kind of initiated because of a conversation, well, at least I think it was, a conversation that I had with one of the panelists. And we tried to talk about how this magic of auto-classification is emerging and you know, something in the industry that's coming forward. And Sandy slapped me on the side of the head and said, it's here. People are using it already. I know it's a euphemism, but you know, verbally she assaulted me. And really, you talked a lot about how organizations are actually implementing this and using events that are catastrophic, like e-discovery events or M&A events or things that are really traumatic to an organization, to begin to build something. So when we were talking about it, somehow or another this panel came up and I was asked to kind of try to orchestrate a conversation around this. And the tagline I put in there, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, is because it's the very nature of these tools that they have variability, that they are not black and white. They can be taught black and white, but they are not, by their very nature, black and white. There was a slide deck circulating earlier, but this is my esteemed panel. Industry leaders, them all. How's that? You like that? We will also be available for discussion after this, not only because we think we're going to go over, but also because we're very interested to hear some feedback on this presentation. The way I tried to organize this first was to talk about projects. How do these things start? And where, you know, I'll get up here. Actually, I'm kind of walking around on the floor here. Nobody can see me. How do these things start, right? How do organizations decide that they need to do these things? In the discussions that we had ahead of time, somebody had money. That truly was one of them. That a budget became available. They knew they had some problems. They keep hearing about technology and AI and auto-classification and machine learning and all these great things. So they decided they wanted to try and do some work about it. The one that I see most often in the consulting work that I do is client obligations. I've helped firms fill out that 200 questionnaire from clients asking about how they manage information, about how they govern not only the data about the client, but the data the client gives them. And I think that the other thing that keeps coming up is firms are changing. They have to change. In fact, it's one of the oldest industries that hasn't gone through a traumatic change yet, except for the accounting firm that just bought a law firm, right? Wasn't that a dramatic change? So that certainly is one of the impetuses, and I think also just standard kind of trying to get better. What's the first thing that organizations need to do? Scope it. Put some runway markers around what you want to do. And unless I'm mistaken, I believe this deck is available for download later on the app and stuff like that, right?
It will be available after this session.
Yeah, thank you. And it's not really that dramatic, but it is pretty good. Identify the scope and scale of the project, right? Try to get really good idea of what you want to do, or get a really good idea of what you want to try or what you want to learn. Some of the upfront decision making that I think is critical, and that I think we talked about as a panel that was really critical, is choose a project that can scale. I think the analogy was not something so big it would cause imminent failure of the whole law firm, but not something so small that nobody would care, right? Make sure that it's something that can kind of scale. If it's so niche-y that even if you were successful at it, no one would ever care, that's bad, right? But if it's big enough where it could make an impact, that people would have at least some sort of a aha moment as they kind of looked at your learnings and what you're doing, that would be great. And that if potentially choose the taxonomy, that was one of the things that I put in there. Have a piece of data that has the ability to tell you something, either tell you something kind of about the firm or tell you something about a process within the firm or a process within your organization. And for those organizations that can't do any of those things, just look at your data. One of the stories that Sandy and I had discussed earlier was that sometimes doing an analysis of the data reveals in itself either the problem or the potentiality of risk or whatever that may be, and it gives you something then to kind of say, hey, we did some analysis on this little piece of the G drive, and this is kind of what it looks like. That's kind of what we thought, but here's a couple of outliers that we didn't think about. Or here's a couple of things that we found that are related to personal health information. We immediately need to act on those, right? So sometimes letting the data drive the project. Does that kind of make sense? One of the things that organizations need to do once they've got those successes is kind of ingrain that technology in the organization. Sandy has an example of an organization, or what the perfect organization would look like when it comes to that.
So, am I on?
You are.
Okay.
You are.
So you've heard about a couple of kind of initial drivers. There's a bunch. It might be a migration issue, some sort of archive, or maybe you're moving data to the cloud. It might be an M&A where an organization is essentially inheriting data from another organization. I think it was Rich mentioned data in motion. We say data in flight. You may have, for law firms, you may be accepting laterals or laterals are departing. So data is moving around. Or it might be something more regulatory like GDPR or some sort of data privacy regulation that is essentially demanding that the data be analyzed for some reason or other. So whatever it is that's sort of leading the charge, that's probably going to get the team together, outline what the first set of data to be analyzed, pull the budget together, and that's going to get the initial thing kind of out of the gate. So you definitely want to watch for that kind of project and use case. But one of the things to recognize, and you can go ahead now, Rich, is that analysis is relatively cheap. As long as you're in there analyzing content for one purpose, you might as well be analyzing it for lots of purposes at the same time. And I kind of liken that process to like a DNA test or a blood test. When you go into the doctor and they do a blood test for whatever, you wind up getting tested for 15 things anyway. It's just faster and easier. And then if there's some other issue, they can bring that forward. So what happens now is that you can kind of combine use cases. They happen concurrently. That allows different groups to participate and share in the expense of the tool and to have more kind of recipients of the value. So what you get is this kind of network effect of the value of the technology, of the people using it, and the data applications essentially across the enterprise instead of department by department or use case by use case. All of that, the kind of turn of phrase that we like is data under management. And the idea is that you're not just going through data once for one purpose, but you are bringing the data into the fold so that it can be managed over time. What are some things that might change over time? If you are evaluating or your client is evaluating content that should be under legal hold, eventually legal holds end. The case settles or that person is no longer applicable to the matter, whatever it may be. So data comes off of legal hold. Now what? How does it get reintegrated back in? Especially when many organizations now are operating under a retention schedule. How long we're going to keep different kinds of data. Think about this. Two big points to what I just said. How long, that's a time element. So time is progressing over the life cycle of that data. And how long are we going to keep different kinds of data? So you need to be able to understand what are the different kinds of data that you have. you're going to treat a contract differently than a Christmas card, okay? Even though both might be a PDF attachment to an email. And so it's important to start taking the bigger picture. You can tell a little bit, I come from an e-discovery background where we're analyzing things like attachments, but there's an e-discovery mentality here if you think about it beyond any particular matter. Same idea, just like clients are trying to get into data under management for discovery, you have the same thing happening now for information governance. And in fact, the client that, the business case that I'm talking about there also happened to be oil and energy. Essentially inherited about 120 terabytes of data from a recent M&A. They inherited the data and the business and laid off the staff. And so all the institutional knowledge about that data had left the building. What do you do with that? So this was a combination of M&A driven and what needed to be under legal hold given the new combined entity. And so AutoClassification was used to identify content that needed to be under legal hold, which legal hold, in other words, which matters, which custodians, and then kind of isolated and protected from potential destruction from a retention policy. So there were two elements to that. And in the process of that, of course, you know, it was this year. So in May, GDPR came out, and all of a sudden the request was, oh, wait, what about stuff that's either not under legal hold, but you're going to have three buckets. You're going to have legal hold, hang on to this. You're going to have, this is rot. Everybody know redundant, obsolete, trivial? Rot in junk. And this is going to go off, you know, hopefully, and be deleted. Then there's the smushy middle ground. And that needs to be under retention, which means you're going to deal with things like time. What is it? What data security? Is there PII in there? All that middle smushy ground, and anything coming off a legal hold goes into the middle smushy. So you need a kind of ongoing approach to deal with what probably is the bulk of the data. And so what we found working with this client was, even though legal hold and M&A had kind of kicked it off, we wound up inheriting all the data that was not either legal hold or rot, and we moved from department to department till, at this point, there's probably several petabytes under management and being kind of routinely assessed for whatever the topics of the day are. So one of the things you want to look for as you move forward is, can these solutions adapt? Do they have rules engines or regex or other things that will let you change the parameters of what the classifications are, because your world is going to change over time.
What would that look like?
Yeah, there you go. A number of products, ours is one of them, that gives you kind of a dashboard view of data. So once you've analyzed it, this is sort of, you know, kind of data visualization 101, kind of presenting up in a fashion that lets someone, whoever's in charge of this, make easy slices and dices of data and then easy decisioning about how to handle that. So far, we've mostly talked about auto-classification as tagging. In other words, adding tags to data. What is this? Who needs it? Who should have access? What does it say? We haven't talked that much about disposition. That's the go-forward piece. So tagging you can think of as, what is this? And disposition is, what do I do with it? And that is the one that's a moving target. There's right. What do I do with it now?
Right. Well,
and later.
That's the biggest thing out of all three examples that if you're going to take away, and that is actionable. Once you have that visibility to the data, make sure that it's in a position where it's actionable. You either have established business rules for understanding what you intend to do with it once you find the things you're looking for. When you talk about actionable, truly the ability to delete, you will find junk. You will find junk that's clearly junk, that is understood as junk, that everybody agrees is junk, yet nobody could agree on deleting it. Make sure that you have some accountability or somebody that can at least own that. And in some cases, you know, at least what I would recommend, decide on the rules. Make the decisions on the rules. Don't make the decisions at the document level. We talked about this a little bit. Mm-hmm. When you try to go through a list of 100 terabytes of data, You can't go through it in the context of documents. You have to go through it in the context of rules. You have to go through it in the context of understanding what your obligations are and what you've decided already you're going to do with those things that fit one of the three buckets or that fit the context of what you're trying to do with the data. These dashboards, they are beautiful, absolutely beautiful. They visually are astounding, but truly what they allow you to do more than anything is make decisions. Allows you to make smart decisions that are clearly documented, that have a reasonable expectation of accuracy, and that demonstrate that you're clearly abiding by your legal and regulatory obligations when you make those decisions. That's, I think, the key part of these dashboard views, at least in my opinion, because that actionability, if somebody gives you a list of 80,000 spreadsheets that you can delete, they're going to kill you. That's not actionable. Sorry, I jumped on your slide.
Something I've been asking at all the venues and things that I've been speaking at lately, is anyone in the room responsible for their organization for signing off that your organization is in compliance with your InfoGov policies? Is that anybody's job? Yeah, there's a couple.
1, 2.
How are you feeling about that? You real comfortable signing your name lately?
I'm okay signing my name. I just had a directive that I have to send that to staff that are below me, and I'm
Yeah.
Her comment was, I'm completely comfortable with signing my name, but we also have to hold accountable the team that works for me, and that's a little less comfortable. I agree with you completely. I can sign my name to anything. My name's not worth very much. But my team, holds me accountable for their things. I agree. Yeah, that's a very good question. I know nobody ever says yes. I love signing that.
Yeah, I love it. I'm totally, my organization's in compliance, top to bottom.
So what happened next at that organization? Well, the context that Sandy was talking about was an organization that really took the next step in maturity and started to talk about data under management. Can you kind of describe what that kind of looked like?
Sure. So what happened was essentially to go from an initial auto-classification analysis to kind of set a baseline and an immediate triage of what needed to go where. So what immediately needed to be protected under legal hold, what immediately could be wiped out as rot. And by the way, for those of you that are looking to have an ROI, a way to sell this to the managing partners or something like that, usually removing rot is enough of an ROI right there. Typically, you can assume 30 to 40% of your content is rot, which means it can kind of come off the table. You are currently one way or another paying to store that. Either it's on your own hardware or it's out in the cloud, and that's pretty expensive. That, I can guarantee, would probably, just the removal of that, would pay for all three of our solutions. Okay, so it's an easy ROI if you're looking for it, and it worked very well for this client in particular. It's also a nice way to get IT on board. If you're looking to kind of win favors with IT for a project like this, that's the ticket. So we had all of those things, and once that first baseline of analysis was complete, the legal hold went off to legal hold, the rot was removed, and then the middle ground, it's actually active now, was rules were edited to account for retention. So retention by document type, by record type, by date, by custodian, and by access, like most recent access. So those become parameters. You've heard us talk a little bit about rules or rules engines. Just briefly what that is, you can think of them like kind of like if-then statements. If XYZ condition occurs, then take this action. So that's how disposition rules tend to work. If it's a contract and 10 years has passed and blah, 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 then go ahead and maybe sequester it, maybe delete it, maybe put it up for evaluation, whatever. There's myriad steps you can take after that, and that is the state of this client's data now. It's more in that kind of like maintenance mode where it's going to be for at least the next 5 years, because that's what they opted for.
Well, and the key part that I liked about that was a discussion, again, about the rules. Being able to get your organization into a position where they're actually discussing and approving rules related to the behaviors of what you're going to do, as opposed to the list of documents. And congratulations, the winner of the first $20 bill for a question is?
Hi, Teresa Britton with Exelon Corporation.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi. So we have definitely been looking at this really closely, the auto-classification, for a couple of use cases. Have actually talked to some of the folks on the panel. A few years now we've been in talks. But what we come back to a lot are the rules. So the rules that you're talking about. What did you use to develop those? So for legal hold, it seems like that would be pretty simple, right? You know sort of what is in litigation or under some sort of regulatory proceeding. It's pretty well defined. But when you get into some other parts of like the retention and records and other things that you might want to auto-classify, the rules can become a little bit more broad or unknown. How do you go about, or what did you use to develop the rules that you then continued to develop under this data management?
Sure, I'm assuming that was to me. Usually we will start, I was going to say, we start from the point of view of if there's a given retention policy. Most folks have either done a data map or a first round retention policy. They can be a little bit vague and they can be a little bit crisscrossed. So for like, if you take something like a resume, is a resume, if it's not someone that you wound up hiring, then it's kind of just a document. If it is someone you've hired, then it becomes part of their personnel record. So that's an interesting kind of gray area.
Right, and if it's a citizen from the EU, from the Netherlands,
then it's even,
you have 72 hours to
exactly.
dispose of it. Yeah.
So one of the key elements there is document type, resume. So being able to marry the document type against the record type, because most retention policies are written by record type, like employee record. Okay, that is everything from your W-2 form to your resume to whatever else. So having these, different classifications on the data is one way that lets you slice and dice so that your rules can be very refined. The other, so one approach is to start with the retention policy. The other way, quite honestly, is from know-how. At least we have been in this business for 18 years, so we kind of have an idea of what to look for, and there's some expertise, either, and if it doesn't come from the vendor, then from a consultant, to help kind of guide those efforts. You're going to think about HR data differently than you're going to think about accounting data. And there are sort of rules of thumb or maybe even battle scars that come from that. So that's maybe not the best answer, but it's the honest answer about how some of this gets.
Well, and also as a governance guy, I would recommend that for your particular industry, you have a significant advantage in that the nomenclature and taxonomy of your industry is well established not only by your regulators and how they ask you for stuff, but just by the industry as a whole. And marrying that kind of industry taxonomy with some of the learning capabilities of these tool sets is a tremendous advantage.
Can I add one more thing, which is that everyone should know this. This is an iterative process. You don't just run it once and step away. There's refinement and tweaking, and because of that, sometimes you can use that to your advantage. So the ones that are sort of a slam dunk out of the gate, yep, we got it, we're confident, everything's great, they can be classified and then kind of moved off the table so that you can kind of hone in and in and in for the more problematic or difficult document types. So if in the course of doing the iterations, you can you generally take the bulk of it away and then get really clever to deal with the weird stuff that gets left over.
One of you could validate this, but one of the concepts that I've talked about with clients is taking the easy content and classifying it, the content that somebody's either touching today or creating today, because those answers can then inform when you're doing legacy reviews of content, because very few organizations change that dramatically over time. So if I make a good classification or categorization decision today on a set of documents, I can use that same learning capability on my legacy that I created 10 years ago or that I created 5 years ago.
That actually works both directions.
Right, yeah.
If for some reason people, and a lot of folks will want to start with the legacy data because it's not in active use and you're not kind of moving anybody's cheese. So if you start with the legacy data and you kind of build the profile for the organization, you can roll it forward. It's almost the complete opposite, but I've seen both techniques.
I got to tell you, we're about 10 minutes out, I think. We've had discussions offline and again today, and these panel members have a lot of stories, a lot of very good examples on how to solve data classification problems, on how to solve or take advantage of some of the capabilities of these tools. If you get an opportunity, come on and talk to them, ask them about their stories. Outside of the fact that they're actually software vendors, they're actually really, really intelligent and smart people, and they really are able to give a lot of insight onto techniques and capability sets that exist in the marketplace, not just necessarily with their particular product, on addressing particular problems. I think Jan's time card entry one is by far, I think, the most innovative one that I really like from a law firm perspective because of the very nature of it, and to Sandy and I's discussion early, kind of the sensitivity of it, but not the sensitivity of it, how it can reveal lots of things that are really important, but that people get a little wonky about, when looking at it. So I think that's really key. Do we want to keep going for questions? Did somebody else? Was there one over here? I'm sorry. No? Okay. The capability sets that these companies that they're representing have are starting to become something you should expect from your content manager provider. Because in fact, while you're creating this content and the tools you're using to create it, the tools you're using to store it, the tools you're using to distribute it, they should be doing this exact same thing, if not taking advantage of these tools and integrating with them very tightly in order for this to happen. The velocity of information is never going to get any slower, and the volume of it is never going to get any less. It's critical to put these things into the early part of information creation and storage and retention, because it's not going to get any easier. To your point earlier, Rich, it never gets easier. It always gets harder over time.
Can you go ahead? I think it's the next slide. Yeah.
Oh, hey, there we go.
So, one of the things that's kind of playing out right now is where should the data be and how should we manage it? Should it be one giant, enterprise content management or a DMS? Should we have multiple? Like it or not, this is kind of the current state of affairs. We're a little bit all over the map. And so you guys have a kind of a decision in front of you. Do you want to treat these independently? Do you want to kind of corral them together? If you're fans of the term coined by Gartner, which is called content services, you'll recognize that here. What they mean by that is essentially an intelligence layer between the data as it's stored and the data as it's used. So data might be stored in Exchange or in Office 365 or in OneDrive or even on your hard drive. But if you are trying to use some kind of application that cuts across, like I'm an EU citizen, where's all my PII? You're going to need to go across them. So you're going to need that intelligence layer, which is by and large AutoClassification, to be in between the storage and the use case if you want to cover all of them.
Any other questions? So a couple of things that I wanted to kind of close the conversation with, and that was some of the learnings in getting a chance to talk with my esteemed colleagues about this subject. One is try to find things that are easy to do when you are exercising these projects. The first project you do should not be analyzing all the content of all the senior partners within your firm to make sure they did it right. That's not a model for success. There's way too much non-technical baggage with things like that, right? The other thing that I really like is finding a champion. The reason that we're in these industries is because of our passion. There's somebody in your organization that has that passion. It might be you. It's okay to be your own champion, right? To be, what's the phrase? I'm my own biggest fan, right? I've got to be the one person supporting this more than anybody else because it's something that I'm passionate about, that I'm going to advocate for. The other thing that Sandy really mentioned, and that is critical, because finance always looks at these projects, find where your return on investment is, whether that is a reduction in risk for the firm due to regulatory or compliance issues or other mandates by clients, right? Or what is your actual dollar amount that you could possibly save by retiring a legacy system or by getting rid of duplicate data or anything like that. The other thing that I would that hasn't really come up, but that certainly is a key part of it, we're not just talking about unstructured data. Jan's example of highly structured data and being able to analyze that and turn it into something valuable, or at least put it in a position of being able to dispose of it. Organizations do that today. The legacy SAP systems you installed in the 90s, guess what? They are able to be managed out when it comes to data, as hard as it may be, and these tools have the ability to do those things. And the other one was the start small and improve over time. To Rich's point, time isn't your friend when trying to classify. However, it is a way that you can develop that skill set within your organization to really put it as a center of excellence for not only for you to be able to do what you need to do to help the firm, but also to be able to help the firm do things for customers or for clients that they couldn't do before. And that was our presentation today. Does anybody have any questions? Like I said, we're available up here. You're more than welcome to come up and talk to us, and thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference.